Hello, boys and girls, ladies and gents. This is DafubFilm&TV, and I have just watched episode 4 of season 2 of Loki. So, without further ado, here is my thoughts/review on it. There may well be spoilers, just so you know. I like this episode. I know I've been hedging my bets a lot because, they kind of I wasn't necessarily terribly excited by the show and by others I'm reviewing, like Gen V, which I still think is kind of better written than this. But this is, Loki's the best. Season 2 is the best written thing we've gotten out of Disneyplus in quite a while. It's a much faster paced show where things actually happen on a per episode basis compared to Ahsoka, nor is it the train wreck. Well, again, it's clearly not the train wreck that Secret Invasion was. So in that regard, again, because of the writing, it is a significant upgrade. Uh, again, spoiler warning. In terms of this episode, again, this is a time travel show. So lo and behold, earlier on in the season, again, spoiler warnings. Haven't seen one of the previous episodes. Was it in episode 1 or 2? I cannot remember off the top of my head. We saw Loki being stuck with the stick that kind of sends you to an alternate dimension / disintegrates you. I don't know if it actually kills you now or just sends you to a kind of a dumping ground for variants. I can't remember off the top of my head. I certainly, again, since the beginning of the season, we've had no clarification on that, so I can't say one way or another. But we see Loki being zapped, which sends him off into the time loop. We see this earlier on in the season, but we don't get to see who does it. And I had the sneaking suspicion from that Loki was actually zapped by himself, because again, this is a time travel show, so surely again this is where at the point in time where Loki is randomly jumping around in time, back and forwards in time. And so it's quite possible that Loki would have run into himself at some point in the future and realizing, oh, this is me from back then, from my perspective. I need to be zapped right now, or our previous plans are all going to be messed. My synchronization with the timeline will be out, and I'll be jumping randomly all over the place forever. And so, lo and behold, he quietly walks up behind himself and zaps him, and we then go on from there. Again, it was predictable. Wasn't an eye roller for me, but it wasn't a surprise either. This kind of thing tends to happen in shows or stories based around time travel, people jumping around in time all the time, willy nilly, with all of the disruption and chaos that can cause. In terms of the rest of the episode, we get more story. We get Renslayer using the, again, previous episode, spoiler warning for this episode. There's a torture machine which Loki uses on one of the rogue TVA agents who went off to the timeline and decided to have his own life, where he became a famous actor. I can't remember the name of the character. He's got some kind of code name or serial number, so I can't remember it. Maybe he was calling himself Brad in his alternative timeline. Maybe I can't remember. But in one of the previous episodes of Loki, you get this. He's basically caught. He's pushing pushing the brig, as it were, and then Loki uses this rather weird machine which creates an energy box around him, and he can make the box smaller and smaller to torture this rogue TVA agent into giving him the information he wants, so he can find his female alternate Sylvie, which he does. And that's how they find Sylvie this season, after she went off on her own after the end of the last season, after killing who. In this episode, we see Renslayer coming back and using the machine against the other rogue TVA agents and their leader to try and coerce them into siding with her. Only one of them, again, the guy who was caught initially, sides with her because he went off and did his own thing, and the rest of them refuse to do so. And Renslayer uses that torture machine, which for some strange reason has been left in that brig room all this time. And again, a lot of people will point this out as a as a plot error slash flaw, and I'd have to agree that surely they should have taken it out of the room and then had Renslayer bring it back in. But either way, Renslayer has Miss Minutes turn it on, control it, and she uses it to literally crush them all to death in what should have been a particularly, like, there's like at least a dozen people in the room, and they all get put into this energy box around them, which then closes around them and crushes them into itty bitty pieces. It'd be rather horrific, and would have made kind of a real kind of shock sequence, as it were, in the episode, if it weren't for, again, the creative restrictions of Disneyplus. They can't show that. What should have been a pretty brutal, gory scene, horrific scene, can't be shown on Disneyplus because everything has got to be, PG-12, maybe PG-13 at worst. And so that is completely hidden away in the episode, off screen. In other words, you hear people screaming, but you're looking at Renslayer the entire time it's going on, because again, they can't show it. They can't even show some blood pooling on the floor without, so you don't see the gore, but you see the blood and the screaming. Now you can't even, they can't even do that. And it, for me personally, yeah, I'm thinking, yeah, this is a pretty, brutal thing, all right, pretty brutal idea, but it doesn't have the impact that it would have otherwise, because the creative restrictions at Disneyplus prevent that idea, that concept, that scene, that death scene from being played out properly or effectively, because they just can't show it on screen, because Disneyplus just doesn't do that kind of content, which I think is a pity. And they do their best to have that scene and get past the Disneyplus censors, as it were, but there's only so much they can do. And I like, in the defense of the director, I cannot see how they could have shot it any other way to plus it, more than they did. It's just that the fact that they can't show it, really, and doing it off screen, like, sometimes that leaves it up to your imagination as to what's going on. Sometimes that can be, in the right circumstances, more effective than actually showing you. But it to me, for me, it does personally, it doesn't work here. It doesn't work. It doesn't work anywhere near enough to be truly effective. And while they do have one of the other kind of good TVA agents come into the brig after the effect and find, what's left, and she's looking at it, you don't get to see what's left, and she's horrified and so on. Again, the kind of the off-screen, irrespective of what the actress doing her best to sell it, the fact that you don't see it, you don't even get to see blood on the floor, or a pool of blood on the floor, gives you an idea as to, it doesn't have the impact that if this was a show being made on HBO, as an example, or on Netflix, would have had. And so this is kind of, I think this is so far the first example I can think of, genuine example in this season of Loki, where the kind of, again, you can't do more than PG-12 / PG-13 at absolute best, or should I say at absolute worst, has, hurt the impact of an element of the story, and in this case hurt the episode. It just doesn't have the impact it should have, considering how these characters die and how it's implied they die, and both in terms of the actual death itself and then the reaction upon discovery of the aftermath in the brig. in the TVA as to what's happened to these people. It just doesn't have the impact that it would have if it was on a HBO. Now, admittedly, if it was on HBO, they could overdo it. It could be overly gory to the point of being cartoonish and so on. But the creative restrictions of Disneyplus are most definitely felt in those two scenes, both the scene where it actually happens and then the aftermath scene where it's discovered by one of the goody TVA agents. In terms of the rest of the episode, it turns out that there are doodads in the TVA. In other words, some sort of machine or machines within the TVA that suppress magic within the TVA. They get shut off, as is Miss Minutes. In other words, they reboot the entire system and shut her down. And I thought her kind of sort of think HAL 9000 being slowly turned off in space. Is it Space 2001? 2001: A Space Odyssey. That's it. If memory serves me correctly, it's not as dramatic as that, but it does the job, and it's perfectly fine sequence. I have nothing really negative to say about it. But it also, again, as a result of the reboot, the magic suppression is turned off, so we do get to see a bit of kind of a magic done by Sylvie and Loki. But again, limitations of the show budget wise means you don't get, considering what the two Lokis are theoretically capable of. I mean, yeah, there's been some of it this season already of their use of magic, but it's nowhere near as kind of, there's nothing like the kind of spectacle you could theoretically have. Again, budget constraints and so on. Although it should be noted, where you have seen them use magic in the show to date, it looks good quality. It doesn't look like the kind of mediocre to bad CGI you saw in Secret Invasion. When you do see CGI in this, it looks much better, much higher quality than it was in Secret Invasion, which is probably some of the worst CGI or most mediocre CGI we've seen in any of the Disneyplus content to date. So with Sylvie and Loki have got their magic back. I'm sure that'll have consequences in the TVA. They've got it back. I'm sure that will have consequences running through the rest of the show. I think it's 6 episodes. Yes, I thought Gen V was 6 episodes. It's actually 8. I believe though that Loki is 6 episodes. So there's 2 more to go. And now they have their magic and the abilities back in the TVA. Maybe we'll see potentially significantly more, what's the word for it? Spectacle, compared to, in terms of magic use, compared to what we've seen so far. That could, turn out not to be the case, but, we'll see how things play out. In terms of the rest of the episode, spoiler warning again. The variant of he who shan't be named, aka He Who Remains, and in the case of this particular variant, also known as Victor Timely, he doesn't just get killed this episode, he gets disintegrated into itty bitty pieces. Now, this again didn't surprise me, because irrespective of what you think of Jonathan Major's performance, again, I know there are people out there who don't like it. For those who don't know, the other name for the character is, again, when it comes to the comics, I'm a complete, like, I did not read any of these, so my knowledge and understanding of Kang the Conqueror is, I know nothing about the character basically, and I haven't actually watched the movie, the Ant-Man movie, the MCU movie where Kang first turns up. So I can't comment on the character, although I believe there are people who do not like Jonathan Major's portrayal of either He Who Remains, who was in the end of the previous season, who got killed by Sylvie at the end of the previous season. Spoiler warning. And in the case of, and I don't know what happens to the version of Kang the Conqueror in the Ant-Man movie, because I had Quantumania, because I haven't seen it. I probably won't bother seeing it at this point. But there have been criticisms of Major's portrayal of the character, both in season one and again here in season two. But I have no issue with this because again, these are variants. They are, Kang the Conqueror notionally, yes, but they are very, very different in terms of their backgrounds, how they were raised, and so on. And so you can expect quite different behavior and quite different temperament. So considering that Mr. Timely is basically from kind of like the 1800s, I don't know if he was born a slave or was born after slavery, ended. I assume it was after, maybe assume it's after slavery ended, or maybe he was born free, when slavery was a thing. I can't remember the exact time period in which they found him in again. I can't remember. It was World's Fair 18. Oh, actually, if it was in the 1890s or 1800s, that kind of period, 1880s or 1890s. This would have been post Civil War, post slavery. But even so, he's kind of a creature to a degree of his time. He was previously given, surreptitiously the TVA handbook as a child, but the scientific knowledge and technology needed to, for him to reach his potential just isn't there in the era in which he was raised and educated. And this is also, again, he's something of a in his the era he came from, something of a con man slash huckster slash trickster, which isn't again necessarily, he's the era from which he came and the fact that he's against the obvious black. There would be a multitude of restrictions in place, both in terms of poverty and the impacts that have, particularly back then, discrimination in one form or another, which would have been held him back. One could argue that he's actually quite a well-adjusted character, taking that into account, considering the era he's coming from. But I think the way the character is portrayed, the way Jonathan Majors is playing this variant and the previous one was perfectly fine. I have no problems, no issues with his acting in this at all. What I can say about it, again, in this case, he gets killed. Firstly, because this is a time travel show, they could go back and rescue him to prevent him from getting killed. One, which is actually the way he gets killed, is quite a CGI intensive way, and it looks pretty damn good. I have to say, credit where credit is due. They spared no effort to make sure it looked the way it should. But it's also one, as I said, maybe they bring him back, maybe they don't. It doesn't matter. It's a time show. We've got multiple kind of branching off timelines, constant new branches off the main timeline happening over and over and over and over and over again. So there's basically an unlimited supply of He Who Remains, aka Kang the Conqueror. And so there are plenty of Kang the Conqueror variants out there. I'm sure they might find, he might be one of the rarer kind of ones in terms of his personality and his behavior, but I wouldn't be surprised if they couldn't, find another somewhere else, or again just go back in time and rescue him. But so I wasn't shocked by that. And again, when it comes to things like that, the shock is kind of also mitigated by the fact they can't do gory deaths. So that to a degree, kind of lessens the impact slash shock value. And I personally really do think that Disney needs to introduce some sort of parental rating system slash control system, so they can have some more, again, mature content. That doesn't necessarily mean, Game of Thrones level at its most extreme, or House of the Dragons level at its most extreme, or anything else. But even if they could just make kind of, stuff that you'd have to be 15 or 16 years of age to get to see in the cinema, I think that would be a step in the right direction. I don't think it necessarily undermines what they did there in terms of like it's not like it's CGI, but it's not gory in any way. But when you take that death into account, with the death of those rogue TVA agents earlier on in the episode, which is again done off screen, where you hear the screaming, but that's it. it kind of lessens the impact, as far as I'm concerned, of those deaths. It's just less dramatic, less shocking, or there's no real potential for shock at all. But again, the way it was done, they didn't cut any corners, and the CGI was to the was to a more than good enough standard, kind of considering this is supposed to be appointment level / quality television. So I give them great credit for that. As a warning for anyone who didn't like the key lime pie scene, or in an earlier episode where Mobius and Loki were having a conversation when they sat in what looks to be a cafeteria at the TVA eating key lime pie. We're back in that cafeteria again. I'd say this is a very well put together set. That would be my guess. And as a direct result of that, they're going to reuse them over and over again to economize. And so if you didn't like the key lime pie stuff earlier on in the season, it's I think the conversation in this part is better. It's less maybe kind of, shall I say, mopey / introspection-y than the first one was. And this again comes back to whether it's this episode or the first episode of the season, there are creative choices that were made in the first season in terms of the female Loki alternate Sylvie, in terms of who the actress they cast, how they write the character, how the character is portrayed, that the comic book fans don't like. The same is true for Loki himself. I don't know about their feelings about Mobius. Again, this is someone who never read any of the comics. I'm a complete Philistine, shall we say, on this issue, on this particular, again, I'm my familiarity with comic books is relatively limited, and it's mostly DC. Although I do have a few of the kind of Alien versus Predator graphic novels. I did enjoy them quite a bit back in the day, so I do have a few of those hanging around somewhere. But I know relatively little of the Marvel comic stuff overall, and so as a direct result of that, I might be hating this episode or hating this season for the same reason that many comic book fans didn't like or hated season 1, because those creative decisions around the characters are still there. Although for me, there seems to be a lot less. I think from what I remember, because season 1 came out, I want to say 2 years ago, so it's gotten a bit fuzzy in my memory. But there's less. There's a lot less kind of introspection and sort of down in the dumps kind of Loki elements to this season there was to season 1, which again a lot of the comic book fans did not like at all. So that is again gone here, or not gone, but it's maybe not. Well, that's those issues for the character have been kind of dealt with for the most part. So there is some introspection again. The key lime pie scene in the cafeteria earlier this season, but it's a much more condensed, and isn't running episode to episode to episode the way it did in season 1. So if that particularly annoyed you about season 1, that's not. It's a much less of a problem here. Apart from that, the end of the episode, again, spoiler warning, the end of the episode has again the variant of what is his name again? Of Kang the Conqueror going out to fix the loom, the temporal loom, only for the door to open, him to try and go out and get vaporized by the temporal radiation. Again, spoiler warning. And then not long after, the loom basically explodes, and as far as we can tell, the TVA gets obliterated and everyone in it gets killed, although this pretty much happens kind of off camera. It cuts to credits, basically. Now, it's possible we'll get to the next episode again, and, they find up quick, let's do this, yada, 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 and they save themselves. Or, time travel or whatever else it happens to be. Someone goes back in time and to before the loom going boom. Who knows how it'll play out. But, and it'll be, I fully expect that this, it's a bit of a cliffhanger, but I expect it to be resolved very quickly next episode. If it isn't, if it plays out over the remaining 2 episodes of the season, that could be a lot more interesting. But I don't think that's going to happen. Again, overall, it stays within the kind of the, what's the word for it? It stays within the same kind of the criticisms of the show I've had overall this season, and last season. It's actually, I'd say this episode is probably, certainly this season, the most negatively affected by the creative restrictions of Disneyplus, because of the way those rogue TVA agents are killed. It happens off camera. You get reactions from basically missed minutes to it, which are typically, unsurprisingly, spoiler warning again, psychotic in nature. And then you've got the two, actors, the two live characters, the rogue TVA agent whose name I forget, who sides with Renslayer, and Renslayer looking at what's happening, going, but even so, it's because of that restriction, the kind of doing it off camera with the screaming for me wasn't enough. Hugely reduced the impact, or negated what should have been the impact of that scene. Same for when some of the goodies go to the TVA brig and find the remains of what happened. The shock value isn't there. The shock value of killing the Kang variant, again, because he's killed by temporal radiation, kind of makes sense the way it happens. But the lack of any form of kind of gore, again, removes any shock value from it. And the fact that they then go to the end of the episode and everyone appears to be killed, it's the stakes. If you're going to be vested in the characters by now, you already are. If you weren't to the end of season 1, particularly because you didn't like how Loki and Sylvie were written, then this kind of lessens the impact even further. But I know there are 2 more episodes, so the final part of this episode, again, the whole thing basically blowing up, wasn't, I didn't find it shocking, and I fully expect it to get resolved very quickly next episode. And it may well come down to, again, if they don't resolve that in a effective manner, whether it's done quickly or maybe even done over the final 2 episodes. If it's done over, very quickly and very, the danger here would be is if the writing isn't up to it, if the writers aren't up to it, and they do not resolve how did they not all die, or if they did all die, how they all come back. If they don't do it effectively, whether they do it quickly or take an entire episode or 2 to do it, that will, for me, kind of be very much a mark against the episode and against the show. In other words, shoddy kind of cliffhanger storytelling, where they then, in the next episode, they resolve the issue, the cliffhanger, very, very quickly. I think probably to go back to, as I compared it to, not this, but Gen V, to another season of a show we've seen this year, I think it was this year, this year, was Star Trek Picard, season 3. One of the best cliffhangers and one of the best cliffhanger resolutions that I've seen in television or streaming shows was the kind of not the first episode with the Borg, but the second episode, where, again, for those who haven't seen Star Trek Next Generation, spoiler warning, Picard is assimilated. That episode ends on a cliffhanger, which they then basically spend the next episode, which I think is the first episode of the next season, because it's an end of season cliffhanger, resolving. And it's done. I think that's one of those those episodes together are two of the best episodes of Star Trek we've seen. And again, the names of those episodes, I'm sure someone, if they know them, put them down in the comments below. but they were two. It was done really, really well. And so if it's, if they all jump through a portal, right at the last moment, at the beginning of the next episode, fine. But you can't kind of end an episode on a cliffhanger like that and not execute successfully on the resolution, whether it takes a few minutes or the entirety of the next episode to do so. So that would be a danger for the run of the show, the rest of the show, and for the rest of the season as a whole. I don't like cliffhangers that are resolved badly. I don't like story threads that run throughout an entire run of a show or almost an entire run of a season and then get resolved in a very kind of amateurish, even dare I say a childish way. The obvious recent example of this is the Hera Syndulla story thread or one of the main story threads with that character in Ahsoka. It's ended in a very kind of very quick, very truncated way, and I don't think it's resolved effectively or successfully at all. Hopefully that doesn't happen here, but if it does, it'll be a black mark against the entire season as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, I think that's pretty much all I've got to say on this. So far so good. Did Renslayer get again, spoiler warning, did she get zapped again? She did. So maybe she's permanently dead now, or she's been dumped somewhere off into the timeline. Who knows what's gonna happen over the next 2 episodes? But that's another issue. Is Renslayer dead permanently? We're gonna see her again. Are they all dead? We're now going to see an alternate character taking up the mantle. Who knows? Or maybe they just resolve it, in a very, again, as I've already voiced my concerns, way that I would not approve of. But we'll have to see. They've got 2 episodes left. I think this episode was 48 minutes long in total, including previously on and credits. So maybe the next episode's longer. Maybe the final is a longer episode. Who knows? We'll see how it's resolved. But depending on the length of the 2 episodes, they might have less than 2 hours of or an hour and a bit of runtime left. 80 minutes to 2 hours of runtime left. Well, yeah, about 90 minutes if both episodes. The next 2 episodes are 45 minutes long, and trying to resolve this cliffhanger properly and then resolve the rest of the season for the story that's for the season. I'm sure they can do it, but they could also, again, so far this is the best bit of Disneyplus content we've had, probably, in my view, certainly written in the last year or two, although that's not necessarily high praise because how badly the previous seasons or the previous Star Wars and MCU shows have been over the last 12 months to 2 years, how badly written, how badly put together they've been. But if they could, this is the danger, ending with that cliffhanger so close to the end of the season. They got 2 episodes left. Do they have the time on the screen, space in this on the page to both satisfactorily, properly resolve this cliffhanger and then resolve the season? I do not know. We're going to find out, obviously, and I'm going to watch both those episodes and review them. But if I would have done this earlier in the season, quite frankly, if I were going to do a kind of a not end of season cliffhanger like this, I would have done it earlier in the season to give me more time to kind of resolve it properly. But we'll see how it plays out. Anyway, this is DafubFilm&TV. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If for some insane reason you're not subscribed to this channel, please do so. Please like the video and comment below because the algorithm likes that. And please ring the bell for instant notifications when I upload new content. This is DafubFilm&TV signing off. Toodaloo.